Hello. I'd like to share some of my past and how I came to be on this spiritual journey. My hope is that we can share stories and piece together the things that make the most sense about the world around us and this universe that we all share. I grew up in a Southern Baptist family, but it was kind of strange because they were also liberal, so it was kind of an odd dichotomy. And I grew up in Oklahoma, and I was a little bit awkward as a child. I didn't necessarily fit in real well, and in high school I had this sort of mini awakening. I didn't really know what was happening or what was going on, but I just had this moment where I kind of had this like amazing concept of kindness and how important that was in the world and how important that was for me. And really after that, dealing with people and having good relationships and very meaningful ties to people became much easier for me. And after high school, I left Oklahoma, joined the Army, and became a counterintelligence special agent. And this is right around the year 2000. And after my training, I went to my first unit, and 9/11 happened. And, we were at war. And that came with, obviously, our unit went to Afghanistan. I spent a lot of time in Kuwait. And then we would end up, invading Iraq. And there it was this difficult situation, where you're trying to do your job and, crazy things are happening. There's ballistic missiles flying in, launched at our camp that we were stationed at, just crazy stuff. And I even got married in Kuwait. My wedding certificate is actually in Arabic, and because I was in the military, I ended up spending the first year of marriage apart. But I've been married for 20 years now. But I'd spent 2.5 years total in Kuwait, and I kind of created this oasis for myself in the desert, where I was completely engrossed in my job, and I loved it. It was something that I was good at, and it was something that that was very meaningful to me. After I got out of the Army, I became a contractor and spent about 18 months in Baghdad, Iraq. And when I was there, it was a pretty tumultuous time during the occupation of Iraq, and it was hard to see just the kind of sadness and the war-torn nature of the country that what had befallen it ever since we kind of had launched our invasion and occupation. And so I left Iraq, and I would took a break from everything, and my wife and I started a business. It didn't end up being successful, and even though I kind of told myself I was never going to go back to war, I ended up, never say never. I ended up going back to being a contractor. I went to Kandahar, Afghanistan, and worked for a U.S. Air Force unit there. And when I went there, I was pretty broken. I was broken financially. I was mentally in a bad place because I was going back to war. In my earlier years there, I actually kind of had a breakdown, almost a nervous breakdown. Hardly anybody knew about it. I kept it to myself, but it was really hard. But then I became wholly and fully dedicated to our mission there. We were there to help protect people and keep people safe at Kandahar Airfield. And like I said, I just dove into my work, and it kind of takes an extremist to catch an extremist, and so I became just engrossed in this job of trying to do my job the best that I could and help protect people. At the time, this was the busiest runway on planet Earth, and I was spending 80 to 110 hours a week, 7 days a week, and this is over 6+ years. And I actually never left Afghanistan during that time, not even for short trips. So I was just there, and it's kind of hard to describe what it's like to be in a situation for that long. And I think there's a concept that stars that burn too bright can go supernova, and I think that I put all this time and energy into this, and I just completely burn out, and I was kind of left to wander this desert, and there wasn't an oasis for me anymore. There was no light. And, I'd always realized this, but it began to wear on me that the enemy were people too. And you're part of this military industrial complex, and you see the evils that it can have around it and inside of it. And I tell people now that Afghanistan is like the swamp of sadness from the Never-Ending Story. If you've never seen the Never-Ending Story, maybe you've heard of it when you watch Stranger Things when they're talking about it. But it's the swamp of sadness is this thing that can consume you, and you can get lost in it. But I think eventually I would make it out, which is part of my story. So I came home after having spent 11 years in the desert over the course of about 15 years. So in 2015, I came back home and kind of I was done with that part of my life, and I knew that it was time to heal. But I didn't really have any concept of what healing even looked like. And so I went to the VA and asked for help. And, you know, the VA gets a lot of hate, some of it probably deserved, but they helped me. And, you know, they probably saved my life. And I think that at the same time, you know, I was carrying the trauma of just being under the constant threat of attack, whether it be from ballistic missiles in Kuwait or, you know, looking through gruesome videos for intelligence purposes, you know, IEDs and car bombs in Iraq, rockets, you know, huge truck bomb in Kandahar. You know, there was always this idea that you could die. And I think that's hard. It's traumatic. And then I think there's this shameful fact that most people won't admit to that are at war for a long time, that you get addicted to it. And so my brain was physiologically rewired for this, you know, adrenaline or whatever, however you want to look at it. It was just physiologically different. And the VA kind of helped explain some of this to me. And I ended up with a therapist there who specialized in this Eastern approach to healing. She was very much into mindfulness and hypnosis. And, you know, the chances of finding someone like that in the VA are probably in the low 0.5% or below. It was really, really odd to be paired with someone like this. And it was amazing. And she really helped me. I've tried in the years since I've come home to piece together some semblance and become a functional human. But everything had still remained fuzzy until about 1.5 years ago. I wasn't consciously on a spiritual path or anything like that. But suddenly I had this really deep moment of clarity and understanding. I mean, some might call it awakening or enlightenment or whatever word or label you want to put on it. I don't think it matters. It was just everything made sense to me. I knew that everything out there, I knew that I was everything and that everything was me. And I suddenly saw the world from this omnist or universalist view where all this great human thought from all over the planet and throughout time had validity, wisdom, and power. That it's all saying the same thing, even if it's in different ways. And that even if it looks different to this person or that person, it's all coming from the same place. And that it's okay if it looks different to me compared to what it looks like to you, because that's the beauty of it. And we're all these beautiful, powerful, and whole people inside of us, even if we don't know it or realize it. And I also saw that the destination was way less important than the journey itself, and that the journey was the best part. It was also clear that I was really meant to go share my journey with people and have them share their journeys with me, because I think that we can all be teachers and we can all be students. Because we all have stuff that we can share, and we all have things that we can learn. And I knew that I wanted to form a spiritual community where people could share their experiences, come together, and have all these varying perspectives. That was very open, where we were all open to the universe. A place that would be warm, inviting, very anti-dogmatic, that was based on omnist and universalist principles. But, you know, since I hadn't been on, well, I guess you're always on a journey, even if you don't know it. But I didn't realize I was on a spiritual path or on my spiritual journey. And so when this happened to me, I wasn't familiar with the nomenclature and the definitions and all the things that come with being kind of in this spiritual, you know, the spiritual place of being in this real world that we all occupy. And so I had this hunger to dive in and consume as much knowledge as I could and try to figure this thing out. because I'd had this great moment of understanding. It was almost like I had to work backwards so that I could better communicate what had happened, both with myself and also talk to other people about it. And so dozens of books later, and having read or watched a big chunk of the internet, I'm here, sitting here talking to you today. And so what I want to do is publish a couple of YouTube videos a week, and one of those will be a discussion just like this, where I'm talking about my journey and perspectives on things. And the other one will be covering, some of these books that I've read and some of these real notable pieces and works, like The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, or Be Here Now by Ram Dass, or the Bhagavad Gita, whatever it may be. I think that it's good for us to talk about these books and what do they mean to us, and I want to let you know what they mean to me. And so I've created a spiritual nonprofit community with an online presence so that people can come together and have a warmer experience than just normal social media. And our community is located at kishar.org. We named our community Kishar after the Sumerian goddess representing Mother Earth, because Mother Earth and nature and all that is just so important. And Kishar also represents the line on the horizon. And I think there's this wonderful link between that line on the horizon and this journey that we're all on. And so why don't we come together to work out the mysteries of the universe and put this puzzle together? And we can be open to the universe and know that our perspectives might shift or change, and that's okay, because we're always in motion. The universe is always in motion, and nothing being in motion and change is one of the few absolutes that exist in the world. And then we can respect one another, and we can have differing viewpoints. And one thing I've also come to understand is that regardless of how deep we get into our spiritual journey, we still live here in the real world. And so I also want to make sure people know that there are resources to stay grounded, and that in these blocks of life, such as health and wellness, or our job, personal relationship, things like that, we can stay grounded in life and keep perspective in this real world that we have to occupy. And that gives us more space for our spiritual journey. It makes us even more likely to be successful in this path that we're on. And I hope to keep seeing you as I make my way down this path. And as I leave you now, I wish you peace on your journey.